Is my $300 1997 Ford Probe GT finally fixed? Is it finally not overheating? Let's find out. Hey everybody, Ethan here. Welcome to Hello Road. So if you've been following along with the saga of my $300 1997 Ford Probe GT, you'll know that I bought this car at auction a few months ago. I actually bought it sight unseen. I had no idea what was wrong with it, but I just couldn't pass it up. A rad late 90s Ford Probe, a purple Ford Probe for $300? Yeah, so I just had to do it. It was maybe not the best decision in the world because, as I found out, this car is incredibly difficult to work on, and me being kind of a terrible mechanic, it's made this rather difficult. So what I found out pretty quickly after owning this car for a day or so is that it was overheating, and overheating pretty badly. I think I narrowed it down to a bad water pump, and I started the process of removing everything to replace the pump and determined that this transverse mounted V6 is tightly packed in here, and it's nearly impossible to access anything. So as a terrible mechanic, do not choose a second gen Ford Probe GT or Mazda MX-6 to work on because it's not easy. In order to replace that water pump, you have to take the timing cover off, and I figured, well, I'm in there taking the timing cover off, I might as well replace the timing belt. I got to the point where I just couldn't get my hands in there to actually undo all the timing belt cover bolts. I removed the motor mount to gain access, and I tried lifting the motor to get access, I tried lowering the motor to gain access, and I just couldn't get my hand in there. So I gave up. I ended up calling a mobile mechanic, and they were able to help me out. Now the thing is, I don't think they realized how difficult the Ford Probe and Mazda MX-6 are to work on, especially the GT with this V6. And it took them a very, very long time to do the work. And I asked them, on a scale from 1 to 10, how difficult is it to work on this Ford Probe? Out of all the cars they've been working on over their lives, how does this stack up in terms of difficulty to work on? And they said 9 out of 10. So maybe it wasn't a good idea to pick this as a car to work on, considering I'm not a great mechanic. All right, here's the water pump that came out of it. It actually doesn't look too bad. We did take the thermostat out too, and this is actually stuck closed, so that's good that that got replaced. Also, the coolant cap had a little tear in the gasket there, so we had to replace that as well. And then of course, belts. Here's the old timing belt, here's the old accessory belts. A lot of stuff went into this car. Now I've heard a few people recommend that you should just take the motor out to replace the water pump and the timing belt. After all the work that those guys put into this, I might tend to agree with that. It seems like it would be way easier to just pop the motor out of this car than try to cram your hands into that tiny, tiny space right there. So this car is a fighter. It does not like to be worked on. I think what I'll do is change the oil in the oil filter, check the air filter, and then just take this thing on a nice test drive around the neighborhood. Make sure it does not overheat. Now with how difficult this car is to work on, there's one thing that they made easy, considering they made everything else a pain in the ass. The oil filter is incredibly easy to get to. Okay, oil change is done. Next up is to put this plastic liner back in. Let's get this wheel back on and finally drive this thing. So now I think the next step is to drive this thing. I let it run for a little bit after they changed the water pump and they changed the thermostat, and it did not overheat, but I haven't actually taken it on the road yet. So I kind of have not the best luck when it comes to vehicles. I'm sort of expecting this thing to just explode as soon as I back out of the driveway. What do you think? Do you think this thing will maintain temperature and not overheat again? Let's find out.
Here it is, the moment of truth. Seems to be running well. All right, let's drive this thing. So far so good, the temperature gauge is right there in the middle. Let's see if it stays there. All right, let's see how we're doing in terms of power. I've been driving my Porsche 944 Turbo quite a bit lately, and that car is super fast. This thing feels quite slow in comparison. I'm not sure if it's actually slow Or maybe there's still something wrong with it. Oh. Car just stalled. That's cool. Got lots of issues going on. All right, so you have a few issues happening here. What is going on here? Got some noise coming from under the hood. Let's get this back in the garage. Idling super low. Power steering. All right, there's no power steering. Yeah, it does look like it's overheating again. Let's take a look.
So I'm not exactly sure where to go from here. The car seems to have more problems now than it did before we did all this work. The car stalled on the test drive. It's still smoking quite a bit. There's no power steering anymore. Plenty of fluid. Okay, I found the problem. Looks like one of these belts didn't get properly tightened. I mean, it's impossible to see in here, but this accessory belt is barely attached. And actually that looks like it's the water pump belt as well. So that's no good. All right, belt is tightened. Let's see if that does anything. Good news, the power steering is back, so I think the belt being loose was the culprit of that. I'm not exactly sure why it's not running quite right. I'm a little concerned the timing belt might be off a tooth. Good news is it's not overheating. There is a check engine light though. Interesting. Just putting my hand there makes the car want to die. Okay, so I don't think it has anything to do with the timing. So what actually happened is when we replaced the thermostat, we had to take apart like this whole half of the engine, which meant removing the air box and these hoses and everything. And when they put the hoses back on, the boot got torn a little bit. So I'm thinking it's running poorly because it has something to do with that. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but you know, when I press my hand down right by the air box, it makes it stall. So I'm gonna go and see if maybe just I could do a quick duct tape job on some of these boots. No idea if this is gonna do anything. Yeah, looks awful, but maybe that'll do the trick. We'll see. Right, so I taped that up. We'll see if that'll actually help. I have no idea. Let's give it a shot, I guess. But it seems to be running better. The idle is back to normal. That's a good sign. Maybe that actually did something. I think we should put that wheel back on and try to drive this again.
All right, what do you think is gonna happen? You think it's gonna drive normally? Let's find out. Actually seems to be running pretty well. All right, let's drive it just around the block. Make sure it doesn't overheat. Let's let it warm up a bit, and then we'll check out the acceleration. Temperature gauge, right there in the middle, not overheating yet. So far so good. Car is not stalling. Still seems to be idling properly. All right, let's see. There we go, that's a lot better. Yeah, I think we're back to normal. Pretty quick. That's an acceptable level of acceleration for 1997 for sure. I'm just gonna go up and down this road a couple times and make sure it's not gonna overheat. All right, I'm super excited because this thing is not overheating. That's awesome. We're well on our way to making this $300 Ford Probe a lot better than it was.
All right, so this is super exciting. The car is no longer overheating. Actually, most of the smoke is gone. I think it just burned off. The car is running really well. It's accelerating really quickly. Maybe this $300 Ford Probe GT won't be so bad after all. There are still a few things that I need to figure out, but right now I can actually drive this thing finally. All right, now let's figure out how much I spent on this car so far. The car itself was $300. I spent about $250 on parts. That includes the timing belt, water pump, thermostat, oil filter, that kind of thing. And there was about $400 in labor to get that water pump and timing belt installed. That was something that I just wasn't gonna be able to figure out myself, and I'm glad that they were able to do it. So when you look at how much I spent on this car so far, we're at just about $950. So I don't know, under $1,000 for a running and driving 1997 Ford Probe GT. This thing is pretty rad. Yes, it needs a few more things, but it's well on its way to becoming a car that will be back on the road and can be enjoyed instead of just going to the crusher. This car was destined for the crusher. It was at the auction lot. Nobody was gonna buy this thing. I saw something special here with this weird purple monster. All right, that's it for today. I'll have more updates on my purple Ford Probe GT coming soon, and I'll have more videos on my fleet of weird 80s and 90s cars. I'll have some reviews of some used cars, some reviews of new cars, and maybe a road trip or two. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you later.